Hey there, Twisters. So for today's video, we're going to be talking about Macklin Celebrini. The draft is just a few days away as I'm producing this, and the Sharks will be selecting him first overall. It's all but set in stone. And even though he's not supposed to be a generational player, he's going to be an awesome addition for this franchise, the face of the franchise, and a star in the NHL nonetheless. So we're going to dive into that in just a little bit. Do remember that on Friday, we're actually having a live reaction to the first round of the draft. So starting at 6:30 Eastern, you can come hang out with me and other Sharks fans and fans of all sorts of NHL teams out there. It's going to be an absolute blast. So let's dive into Macklin Celebrini. But first, we got to throw it over to our sponsor for today's video, and that is the Victory Hockey League. The NHL offseason is here, and after the draft and that initial wave of free agency, there's not going to be a lot happening, but I'll tell you one place where there's always something happening, and that's the Victory Hockey League. The VHL is a free simulation-based online league where you create and develop your own player, you track your statistics, you earn experience points, negotiate contracts, and battle it out for league awards and championships. Thousands of players are currently locked into Season 94, but you can actually join a team right now, and before you know it, the playoffs will be right around the corner. Okay, so how do you get set up? That all starts at vhlforum.com/register. Just see my pinned comment for a link to that. Shortly after, you'll create your player, choosing your position and which country you want to represent. There's actually a World Cup every other season, so choose wisely. You'll start in the VHL-M before working your way up to the two higher leagues. And once you've picked your team, an appointed general manager will reach out to you and you'll sign your first contract. You can then start spending your experience points to customize your player. So for example, I wanted a guy in the middle six, a defensive-minded winger, so I went all in on the defensive coverage attribute. Your player participates in daily simulated games, so the 72-game regular season moves fast. What surprised me most was that my player immediately started contributing. I thought he'd be just killing penalties, but in just his fourth game, he got a hat trick with the Philadelphia Reapers. That's my team. Maybe what I love most about the VHL is how welcoming and helpful their community is, both on the online forums and also in their various Discord servers. They actually have ones for individual teams. And get this, if you support the community by creating player banners or writing up game recaps or even recording a podcast now and then as if this were a living, breathing hockey league, you will actually earn more experience points. So come join me in the VHL by registering at vhlforum.com/register. That's in the pinned comment down below. Thanks so much, VHL, for sponsoring this video. Let's get back to it. So what excites me about Macklin Celebrini is that being this first overall pick, he's known as a complete player. Really, there aren't that many flaws in his game as the scouts have analyzed. If anything, his defense might be, I don't know, above average at the absolute worst, and his skating might need a little bit of work, but he has just an absolutely diverse gamut of skills out there, right? He's known as having a tremendous shot, especially that one-timer of his. That looks completely unstoppable. He's able to generate offense from various points on the ice. His cycling game, the way that he communicates with his teammates that way. He's got great puck retrieval skills, his anticipation of the play. He's a good skater, I think. He's actually pretty fast, maybe not top end speed, but really he does it all out there. And one thing that stands out to me is that when he's asked like which player he models his game after, a lot of players are asked that question. First guy he talks about is Sidney Crosby, and that's somebody he's actually trained with in the offseason before. I don't know how the two of them have connected, but I think it's great when you see a player out there who admires someone who contributes in all three zones. He even talked about Braden Point as well. Yeah, he's not going to be as fast as Braden Point, but he does have some more size that he can use to his advantage. And he's built overall pretty similarly to Sidney Crosby. Another player that he does get compared to in terms of like what the scouts have to say about him is Jonathan Toews. We know that Toews, of course, captained the Hawks to 3 Stanley Cups in the 2010s, but I think a lot of people out there forget just how awesome Jonathan Toews was at his peak. He actually scored over 20 goals a total of 12 times in his career. He was a Selke Trophy winner, and he was a finalist multiple times and a beast in the faceoff circles. So I think that with that skill set, he's a player that you can actually build around. I think that's really important for the Sharks. They're headed into the third year of the Mike Grier regime, and they did get Will Smith 4th overall last year, and he's also known as a fairly complete player. But Celebrini is just in a different class. He's the consensus #1 prospect for this year's draft. And so I think that now that you've brought him in, you can start to think about how you want to complement his skills. And you have a new coach coming in Ryan Warsofsky. How does he want to play the game? And I'm sure that Celebrini is that kind of player who can adapt to that. And just kind of adding to his versatility and his ability to sort of play within his system, him. I like this quote here from the Hockey News. He can play any role on a line, whether he needs to be the finisher or facilitator, the first man in on the forecheck, or the support player in a board battle. And I mean, we've seen all sorts of highlights supporting that exact point right there in terms of anticipation, in terms of cycling the puck, in terms of using his speed to get to a different point on the ice, and also in terms of where to be in order to receive a pass and, for example, rip a one-timer. And sure, he doesn't have maybe the generational shot that Connor Bedard has. It doesn't have that electric, sixth gear that he can break into. But when I see like the players that he's compared to, when I see, for example, his rating as a prospect, people are saying like, oh, he's more close to Connor Bedard than say, Nico Hischier or Owen Power, or he'll be a star to the level that we've seen already with Jack Hughes. I mean, that's got me fired up. The second kind of big point here, and I'm sure a lot of you are already aware, is that he's excelled at every level of competition. He played at Shattuck St. Mary's for high school, in Minnesota. That's obviously a hockey hotbed at that level of play. He then went on to the Chicago Steel of the USHL. We've seen a lot of players come out of that program, or at least advance to somewhere else, and then they end up being a top draft pick. He was the player of the year over there, and then as a freshman, as a 17-year-old at Boston University, he won the Hobey Baker Trophy as the best player in college hockey, and he had some awesome company competing for that award as well, like his future teammate in Will Smith for Boston College. Really excited to see what sort of dynamic those two guys have together. But God, he had 32 goals and 32 assists in his first season in college hockey, playing as someone who might need to still physically develop a little bit more than some of the other players on the ice out there. And really, when I've seen the highlights, I think that he does stand out as the best player. The way that he's able to just burst through waves of defensemen, the shot just looks incredible. I don't even know if NHL goaltenders are going to be able to stop some of the shots that we've seen him rip. The way he's actually been deceptive with goaltenders, I mean, he really does throw them off their game a little bit. And of course, the way that he's able to just kind of confidently assert himself even in the middle of the ice, I think all of that is something to really look forward to, and just a promising sign that a complete player like him can sort of become what he's already been at other levels of competition. And we've already seen him at the World Juniors as well. As a 17-year-old playing against some older players, he was the only player for Team Canada in the top 30 in scoring in that tournament. I know that Canada was a disappointment, but I really like this quote also from the Hockey News here. Celebrini quote showed maturity, leadership, and effective play driving despite starting on the third line. And you'll see other scouts out there talk about just how competitive he is and how that drive is so evident when he's on the ice. Now, the third point I want to make, this is the intangibles. I've already seen it from him. I think that there is sort of that quiet confidence to him. On the ice, don't get me wrong, he does have some of that swagger, but when I see his interviews and when I really take into consideration what sort of environments he's been in, I think that the Sharks are actually going to be a good place for him to, hone his game further and be in a position to succeed, even though this team is actually pretty rock bottom right now as it pertains to wins and losses. The Hockey News already talked about how he, quote, truly elevates his teammates, and then this is what Director of Scouting for the Sharks, Chris Morehouse, had to say. He's an exceptional kid. The family did an incredible job. He clearly has a great foundation at home. You can see the drive, the work ethic, the competitiveness. And I already talked about earlier how he's trained with Sidney Crosby, someone who's been able to play at an exceptional level throughout his entire career. And what he's doing right now in his mid-30s is a thing of wonder, I have to say. So now Celebrini comes into the Sharks organization, right? There are going to be all sorts of young players out there who I'll talk about in a little bit here. He's got a first-year head coach in Ryan Warsofsky. Warsofsky coming from just a long line of success as a coach before coming into the NHL. The South Carolina Stingrays did a wonderful job with him behind the bench, and then especially with the Chicago Wolves of the American Hockey League winning the Calder Cup. So this guy does have a track record of developing some young talent out there. And then you look at the front office side of things. So Mike Grier, general manager, I know he's had some wild moves over the past couple of seasons, to say the least. I could make a separate video about that, and eventually I probably will. But he did play for the Sharks organization. He played alongside Patrick Marleau, who is now part of the front office. Joe Thornton has been basically shadowing a bunch of executives over the past season. He moved back to San Jose after, wrapping up his career in Florida. So these are players who had long, prolific careers. Guys who were drafted really high between Thornton and Marleau, 1 and 2 respectively, now 26 years ago, 27 years ago. Isn't that crazy? Well, anyway, just seeing how those players were able to take cues from veterans, eventually grow into being young superstar talents, and then how they were able to actually have an effect on others, especially Thornton, as a captain and as a vocal leader in the locker room. So I think that they're going to have some influence on how Celebrini eventually develops in that respect. And I'm sure a lot of you out there already know that Macklin Celebrini actually played for the Junior Sharks organization. His dad still lives in the area as an executive with the Golden State Warriors. He's been there as the team has won championships. So I just think that the overall support network is there for Macklin Celebrini. And then lastly, let's wrap up about just how much this could actually be meaningful to the Sharks, right? Here we are, we've had 5 terrible years. Greer comes in halfway and actually does kind of rip off a couple of band-aids. Now we've got a franchise player. There's still a couple of holes to fill, but the Sharks have a promising prospect pool. Going into this year's draft, I've seen them ranked as high as 4th. And I think that was from Scott Wheeler with The Athletic. You have the likes of Will Smith already, and he's actually talked about even being a wing option as well. You have Quintin Musty. The Sharks really do have a lot of top-end forward prospects. William Eklund played his first full season in the NHL last year and made some progress. Thomas Bordeleau is still a name out there. There's, David Edstrom, who came over in the Tomas Hertl trade from the Golden Knights. There's still some work to be done when it comes to defense, but Celebrini has just so many different options for great line mates in the future. The team has salary cap space to bring in veterans. They already took on Barclay Goodrow's contract here for the next 3 years, so there could be some veteran mentorship. Now, I don't think this is going to translate into tons of wins next season. I think the Sharks should still be a bottom 5 team. They are still going to be pretty weak on defense and in goal, at least I think so. But, we're going to start to see the fans be excited for a change. It's been a terrible 5 years, obviously. Season ticket sales have plummeted, but now, as President Jonathan Becker has mentioned, there is some of that fan enthusiasm that is returning. He talked about season tickets a little bit. He talked about how they're having this draft party at SAP Center, and man, there are a lot of tickets already sold, over 12,000. It might even sell out as we get up to Friday. So, that makes me so hopeful that eventually, San Jose could really be a rockin' hockey town like it used to be. And Celebrini, someone who's not quite a hometown kid, but hometown kid adjacent, that could just be a wonderful thing for this franchise and hopefully transform them into a Stanley Cup competitor eventually. Anyway, what are your thoughts on Macklin Celebrini? Let me know in the comments down below. And again, see the pinned comment to join me in the virtual hockey league. It'd be awesome to see you around there. And of course, stick around for Friday's live draft reaction. It's going to be a fantastic time. Whether you're a Sharks fan or not, I want to have you there. And we'll of course have Cortana as well. She'll join me on camera. Anyway, Twisters, thanks so much for watching. Do leave a thumbs up if you could before you go. Have a great day out there, Twisters. I'll catch you later. I'm Nick, and you've been watching, well, Twister Wrister Hockey, of course. Ciao.